Namaste, I'm Chetna Ugale and you're watching my YouTube channel. So in the video series of the algae, today we are going to see the sexual reproduction in the algae. In the previous video, we had already discussed the vegetative reproduction in algae and the different modes of the vegetative reproduction. So today we are going to see the asexual reproduction. So the asexual reproduction particularly is occurred by a different types of the spores. And after the germination of these spores are developed into a new plant body. So in case of the asexual reproduction, there is no active role of the sex organ. So in case of the asexual reproduction, there is no active role of the sex organ, that is antherozoids or the oogonia. So particularly there is a formation of the spores, a haploid spores, which later on develop into a new plant body after the germination. So let's see one by one the different types of asexual reproduction occurred in algae. The first one is the akinets. Akinets are the thick-walled spore with abundance of a food reserve. They withstand the unfavorable condition and germination occurred on the onset of the favorable condition. Akinets are the well-developed spore formed in the algae. And particularly akinets are represented by a thick cell wall and it has an abundance of the food reserve present within it. So akinets is particularly developed to withstand the unfavorable condition. We can say that the akinets type of the spores remain inactive in the unfavorable condition. Inactive means it remains as it is. And on the onset of the favorable condition, it gets germinate. And as soon as the akinets get germinate, it develop into a new plant body. The example are nostoc, ulothrix, cladophora and the pithophora. Yes, there are some more examples of the akinets. So this is the typical structure of the akinets. So akinets may be formed in between the cell or may be developed at the termination of the filament. Particularly these akinets are the cell with the thick wall and which is rich in the reserve food. So particularly this food reserve acts as the energy house for the germination into a new plant body on the onset of the favorable condition. So this is the akinets and you can easily identify akinets. Then the next one is the aplanospore. Aplanospores, these are the non-motile spores, develops in a drought or the unfavorable condition and then may be formed singly or by the repeated division of the sporangium of mother's plant. So particularly in aplanospore, these spores are the non-motile and they form by the single or continuous or repeated cell division of the sporangium. So example is the ulothrix. This aplanospore has been classified into two categories, hypnospore and the autospore. So hypnospore is the aplanospore with a thick wall and abundance of a food reserve are known as the hypnospore. So example pediastrum and the spirella. While the autospores, when the spores are identical to the parent plant, are termed as autospore. There are a non-motile, thick wall and abundant in a food reserve. Example is the chlorella. So the only difference between the hypnospore and the autospore is that the autospore is exactly identical to the parent plant. That's why it is termed as the autospore. And while the hypnospore is a aplanospore in which the wall is get thickened or the thick wall with abundance of a food reserve. So common thing in both these spores are both having the abundance of the food reserve. This is only because to overcome the unfavorable condition and later on it gets germinate. So this is the aplanospore. Then the next type of the asexual reproduction is the endospore. As the name indicates, endospore. Endo means live within or the inside. The spores are formed inside the sporangium, hence named the endospore. They are formed by the successive repeated division and are the motile. They are liberated from the sporangium. An example is dermocarpa. So endospore are nothing but those spores which are developed inside the sporangium, and particularly endospore are the motile. Then the next type of the asexual reproduction is the exospore. Exospores, as the name indicate, exo means it is particularly formed after the exposure to the outer atmosphere or the outside. So as the name, the spore are formed during the exposed to the other environment, and the sporangium get burst at the apex, and after exposure to the outer environment, successive division of a cell occurred and the spherical spores are formed. The example is stichosiphon. So particularly in case of the exospore, exactly the reverse of the endospore. In case of the exospore, after the exposure of the sporangium to the outer environment or to the outer atmosphere, there is a successive division occurred and the spherical spores are formed, and which is a name as the exospores. So that is the exospore, which is the one of the type of the asexual reproduction in algae. And this individual exospore, which is a form after the exposure to the outer atmosphere by the sporangium, and by the successive cell division it gets formed, and these exospores then later on develop into a individual plant body. So this is the exospore. Then the next type of the asexual reproduction is the zoospore by the zoospore. Zoospore are the motile and the naked spores are known as the zoospore. Zoospore may be haploid or diploid and are formed in the zoosporangium. So particularly zoospore are the motile and the naked spores, and they are formed within the sporangium, which is a term as the zoosporangium. So since zoospores are the nothing but the multinucleated and the multiflagellate zoospore and are called as the synzospore. The example is a Vaucaria. So in case of the synzospore, either there is not a formation of a septum or either there is a formation of the many nuclei. So that's why this zoospore occurred as the appeared as the multinucleate. That means there is a presence of a many nuclei within a single spore. And of course there is a presence of the multiflagellate. That means the presence of a flagella in a more than a 2 number. This kind of or such kind of a zoospore is termed as the synzospore. So in this case, the zoospore may have a 2 or 4 or even a many flagella. The examples of these zoospores are the biflagellate zoospores occurred in the Eulothrix and Chlamydomonas, then quadriflagellate, that means the flagella are present in a 4 in number, generally observed in the Eulothrix, and the multiflagellate are observed in the Oedogonium. So this is the zoospore, which is one of the type of asexual reproduction in algae. So overall, this is the different types of spores which are developed into a new plant body and acts as the asexual reproduction in algae. In the coming video, we will see the sexual reproduction in the algae.